If new developments push inflation higher, we may still need to raise rates.
Is the Bank of Canada going to cut interest rates in 2024? And does it really matter if they do? Does that really tell you anything? Or is that a signal that the economy is actually going to be doing worse than it is right now? And what are we hearing from these real estate agents and the real estate industry in general, and how they're trying to put spin on pure deception right now? I saw blowing up on X the other day this house that got 85 offers and was basically listed at a price that was way too low. So basically this is a tactic that real estate agents use in Toronto to create FOMO and hysteria. Is they will price a house way lower than it's worth, not allow you to pay for it, I will note, and then essentially create bidding wars. And then that allows them to then put spin on it, saying, wow, we had so many offers on this house, you know, this house sold so much over asking, even though it could have still sold below what it's actually worth. So the real estate industry continues to make themselves look like shit. I mean, their credibility is so tarnished. People are so sick and tired. I mean, just talk about a industry that is in suicide right now. I mean, not only are sales not happening at the volume that real estate agents need, they're also trying to kill their credibility at the same time. And they think people are too stupid to work this out. But luckily now, with social media and people becoming more aware by spreading and telling you guys that these tactics are being used, more and more people are finding out about it, which is making them less and less effective about doing what they're trying to do, which is generate FOMO and hysteria. Now, they would have you believe, the mainstream media and of course the real estate industry, the mortgage industry in Canada, the interest rate cuts are great because that is going to mean more home affordability for you, and it's going to mean that things are going to get better in the housing market in terms of affordability. And the reality is they are not talking about why that they would be cutting interest rates. The Bank of Canada has constantly said that they're going to keep interest rates high.
With downward and upward forces largely offsetting in the near term, CPI inflation is expected to remain close to 3% over the first half of this year. It is then expected to ease to about 2.5% by the end of the year and return to the target in 2025. In 2 weeks, we will release our summary of deliberations, which provides more detail about our monetary policy discussions. But let me give you a sense of that discussion. As always, Governing Council was focused on the decision at hand, the current policy rate. And there was a clear consensus to maintain our policy rate at 5%. What came through in the deliberations is that Governing Council's discussions about future policy is shifting from whether monetary policy is restrictive enough to how long to maintain the current restrictive stance. That doesn't mean we've ruled out further policy rate increases. If new developments push inflation higher, we may still need to raise rates.
And they're not just going to suddenly divert from that course and say that we're going to drop rates. I think it's very unlikely at this point that we're going to see rates come down in 2024 unless there's an economic crisis or there's a massive event that happens. And that event would have to be so severe that its implications on the economy would be so severe that the Bank of Canada would cut, which would totally offset any of the cuts that they do. And that's normally what happens. You see, people have been almost brainwashed to believe that the central banks, the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve, are center in the monetary universe and that everything revolves around them and what they do with interest rates. And the reality is that's just not the case. In fact, more now than ever before, government spending is actually what's affecting different things in the economy. Government spending is actually what's affecting inflation more and more and more because we simply have so much of it. There's simply so much government spending that the reality is that now it's generating inflation. And when they do these stimulus programs, and now once we've got on this slippery slope of more stimulus and stimulus programs, what that means is when they're doing these stimulus programs, all that money is inflationary. And in fact, I was just reading about in the US how Social Security has been so depleted now that essentially even the Social Security check that the US government is giving out are essentially at a deficit so that they are essentially printing more inflation as well by issuing more social security checks, as the government is at such a massive wide deficit. So everybody would lead you to believe that interest rate cuts are going to be great, you know, this is really going to help people. But the reality is, I would actually say it's the complete opposite of that. Interest rate cuts are a sign things are really bad. Interest rate cuts are a sign the economy is even more unhealthy than it is right now. And those of you that are on this channel, we already know that we're in a recession right now. Even Oxford Economics came out and said that Canada is in a recession. So we're not on our own here anymore. We're not the only ones saying that we're in a recession right now. And even though we printed 0.2% of GDP growth, when government spending is as high as it is in Canada, you have a contracting private sector. The government is constantly spending more and more money, and the GDP numbers are so skewed by that, it's unbelievable. In fact, we should be given two numbers for GDP. One excluding government spending, so private sector GDP, and another public sector GDP. But it's almost impossible to break it down when you dig into the nuance of the reports, because I've done it, because they don't actually go into enough detail to whether you would know whether that industry is classed as government or it's public sector related, and there's such a gray area on it. So they don't provide us with enough information to even work that out for ourselves. So the reality is, guys, you're going to keep hearing that the Bank of Canada is going to cut rates and this is going to be great for you. And the reality is it's the polar opposite of that. And unless we get massive stimulus programs like we had in the prior crisis that we just went through, then guess what? We're not going to be having the hysteria and FOMO that we've seen before, and they would have to print a lot more than they just did. And because that's so in people's recent memory right now, I just doubt that that's going to happen. It may happen, and that will mean even worse inflation as a consequence. That will mean even higher interest rates, and that will mean even more people being pushed to the brink in this system. What I think will in reality happen is there will be some type of crisis event, and the government will use that to come out with a central bank digital currency. And that central bank digital currency will be the end of privacy in terms of money. It will be completely gone after that happens. And then using the central bank digital currency, the governments will be trying to control the economy in a more Orwellian way than they even did during 2020, if you could just imagine that. But a central bank digital currency just allows for such a massive amount of manipulation of different things that it will be a total disaster, because as we know, the government is completely useless and completely incapable of doing anything correct. And usually whatever they do has massive unintended consequences. Think about the trialed UBI with things like CERB and what happened with that. Massive unintended consequences in terms of inflation and people being pushed into homelessness, different things like that. So it's absolutely crazy. If you're looking for a video that is similar to this one, then you may want to check out this video here. If you've enjoyed this video and you're looking for a VPN to get around Trudeau's censorship laws or the news blocks that are now happening in Canada, use my link, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. Thank you so much for watching.